Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. How are you? We're getting set for another class of AT Daily, and Nina's in the house.
And that was the one and only MBD, Mordechai Ben David. Love that song.
Awesome song. That's Shir Lamelech, Sing to the King. Let's light up the darkness. All right. So, special announcement. I'm going to let Nina make it. Let me extend the microphone to her.
Hello, everybody. It's always so wonderful and lovely to be here with you guys. I'm here to pitch the show that I'm going to be doing in a few days. Sal is going out of town with the kids for a few days, and so he's not going to be able to teach AT Daily. And I'm going to be in his place. I will not be teaching Talmud. I am in no way qualified in any way, shape, or form to teach the daily daf. But I'm going to be doing something different, which I think you'll enjoy. I'm going to be sharing some ethical teachings from one of my very favorite rabbis of all time, Rabbi Avigdor Miller of blessed memory. And I think you'll like it. It's going to be much more accessible than Daf Yomi study. It's going to be kind of nugget, bite-sized pieces of wisdom that are going to help you be a better person, lead a better life, fulfill your purpose in this world. And I hope you'll join me. I'm going to be here it's going to be the same time at 6 p.m. this Sunday and Monday. So I hope to see you guys there.
Maybe if you guys insist, she'll keep going on Tuesday. We'll see. by popular acclaim.
I'm preparing Sunday and Monday. Tuesday, I don't know. Maybe. We'll see how it goes.
Awesome. You guys are going to really want... I've been listening. Nina shares these teachings with us and with me and the kids nightly. You guys are in for such a treat. It's going to be amazing.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go do my thing, monitoring comments like I always do, and... take it away, Sal.
Okay. All right. So you heard it here first. Nina will be teaching the class, not a Talmud class, but a bite-sized nuggets of wisdom class, practical, accessible, improve your life as soon as you hear it type of stuff, Sunday and Monday. I'll be teaching, obviously, tonight, tomorrow, Friday, Motzi Shabbos after Saturday night. Then I'm taking the kids away for a few days. Nina will be here. All right, who is going to be with us tonight on this Thursday class? Yehudit in Florence, South Carolina, James in Indy, Melissa in Great Neck, Harold in Oregon, Pauline in Arkansas, Stephen in New Hampshire, Rochelle in Modesto, Miriam in Hayden, Colorado, Paul in Chicago, Patrice in Utah, Lucy in Minnesota, Sharon in Lebanon, Gail in Virginia, Nancy in North Carolina, Crystal says shalom. Oh, I love this song by MBD. I really always have a problem. Like, it's just a 2-minute countdown at the beginning of class. I play some great music, and then I just hate to turn it off once the class starts, but that's a high-quality problem. Moshe Hernandez, shalom desde Bogotá, en Colombia. Bienvenido, Moshe. David in Notre Dame, Indiana, USA. Steven says, hi, Nina. Janice says, oh, you froze. Hopefully it unfroze. Patrice is psyched for Nina's class. So is Yehudit. Michael is tagging his friend Diana. Awesome. Everyone is excited to see Nina. It's going to be such a good class. You guys are really in for a treat. Hannah Rivka says good Shabbat Shalom. And Michael Diamond with us from Scranton. Michael says good noches. Very good. Over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie saying shalom from Georgia, Lindsay from Cincinnati, Gigi from Vancouver. Marjorie is so happy to see Nina. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. We got some important learning to do. That's for sure. Tonight, it's great, right? We got the announcement about Nina. We had some great music from MBD. And we have some classic Talmudic teachings tonight. I mean, classic teachings from the Talmud. Very famous. We've arrived at one of those famous pages in the Talmud. Okay, tonight's class is dedicated by our dear friend Miriam Kreisman in Montreal, Canada. She says, Baruch Hashem, we have everything we need. She didn't need a blessing for herself, but please God, shower Miriam and her husband Moshe and their whole family with blessings. We say amen. But she's dedicating our learning tonight for a refuah, a healing of Daniel ben Davina Bacha. So Daniel ben Davina Bacha, may he have a refuah shlema, a complete healing of everything that ails him. And we say amen. All right. Here we go. Where are we holding? This is Daf Nun Daled, page 54, here in chapter 4 of the 4th volume of the Talmud. We are in Tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover. This chapter 4 has been talking about differences in custom, minhag, from one community to another, general principle. We follow the minhag of the community that we belong to, but when we go travel, if we're in a community that has a greater stringency than the community where we're coming from, we're going to be respectful of that, how that community does it, and not just come in and say, oh, you're allowed to do that, and I'm going to do this thing that you people are prohibited to do, because back at home we do it. We're going to be much more respectful than that. That's as a general principle. Okay. What we're opening with tonight is the 3rd Mishnah, and we're going to complete it. So we're going to open the 3rd Mishnah, and we're going to complete our discussion of it tonight here in chapter 4 of Tractate Pesachim on page 54. We're actually starting toward the end of page 53. So the 3rd Mishnah, the Mishnah discusses additional differences between local customs in a place where people were accustomed to kindle a lamp in the house on Yom Kippur evenings, one kindles it. In a place where people were accustomed not to kindle a lamp in the house on Yom Kippur evenings, in a place where people were accustomed not to kindle a lamp, one does not kindle it, right? Makes sense? However, even in a place where the custom is not to kindle lamps in the homes, one does kindle a lamp in the synagogues and study halls in deference to these places. Similarly, lamps should be kindled in dark alleyways so that people will not be hurt and next to the sick. So Yom Kippur, of course, is like Shabbos in the sense we're prohibited to do work. Yom Kippur, of course, has the much greater additional stringency that we're not allowed to eat, right? So it's very different than Shabbos. Yom Kippur is a day we afflict ourselves in numerous ways, including that long 25-hour fast. So then the question came up, well, before Shabbos, which we want to enjoy, we're not allowed to kindle a light, to light a candle or a lamp, right? A flame lamp, as they had in the old days, during Shabbos, because it's prohibited to kindle. So we always light the Shabbos lights, like women light Shabbos candles before Shabbos begins. So why? So that there will be light in the house during Shabbos. So then the question came up, well, should we have light in the house during Yom Kippur? It's not like we're going to have a festive meal. There's going to be no meal at all. Maybe we should be sitting in the dark on Yom Kippur. And in some communities, they wouldn't kindle lights in the house, right? They just go to bed early. They're not eating anyway. But in other communities, they do. So what, you don't want to be in the dark in your house, but maybe you don't want to have a light because it's a time to afflict yourselves on the day of fasting, the day of atonement. But there's a little bit more to it, as we'll see. So we get into the Gemara. It was taught in the Tosefta. The Tosefta was kind of the earliest commentary on the Mishnah, even around the same time as the Mishnah, both in a place where the sages said to kindle and in a place where they said not to kindle. They both intended to achieve the same objective, right? So their reasoning was the same. They just predicted different behaviors based on whether there was a light on in the house or whether there was not a light in the house. What is it that the sages sought to protect the people from coming to transgress a prohibition in the Torah? Because in addition to not eating during the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, another prohibition, like we also don't bathe and we don't wear leather shoes. These are all forms of afflicting oneself. And also, we don't have marital relations. Married couples are prohibited to each other on the Day of Atonement. Makes sense. We shouldn't be sporting around in the bedroom when we're focused on atoning for a year's worth of sins. So, is having a light on in the house more likely? Are we more likely to have marital relations if there's a light on in the house, or less likely? The sages disagreed about that question. Those who said that one kindles a lamp for the night of Yom Kippur believe that because people do not engage in relations while a lamp is lit, obviously people do it with lights on all over the world, but we've had that teaching elsewhere in the Talmud. What the sages say is that husbands and wives should do it in the dark. And actually we had, oh my gosh, I'm spacing on his name. We had a great teacher from the Chabad movement, and Nina will remind me, who was here and talking quite a bit about how to increase, marital bliss, as it were. And he was telling us that one of the things that that husbands and wives should get used to is doing it in the dark. It's better to do it in the dark. There's more mystery. It's more correct, according to the sages. And it's better for the love life. It was Rabbi Manis Friedman. Thank you, Nina. And he said people should do it in the dark. People should do it in the dark. And that actually is a teaching in the Talmud, that you should do it in the dark. So if the goal is to prevent people from coming to do it at all on Yom Kippur, maybe it would be better to have the light on, because they don't do it when the light is on if they're following the teachings of the sages. Those who maintain the opposite believe that the spouses who are unable to see each other will not be tempted to engage in conjugal relations, right? It's when the lights are on that they get in the mood. They look at each other and they're like, hey, you want to go, etc. And if they don't have that light for that purpose, for the small talk, the intimate small talk that precedes marital relations, maybe that is better to protect people from coming to transgress this prohibition on marital relations of Yom Kippur. Rav Yehoshua said that Rav taught, your people are all righteous. This is from Isaiah 60:21. So Rav Yehoshua quoting Rava. Who quotes the Bible, right? Who quotes the prophet Isaiah. Your people are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, in which I glory. This verse from Isaiah is often brought by sages who are saying, we don't have to overly protect the people. They're good people. They want to do right. It's not like they're just crouching at the door ready to sin as soon as the sages release the most stringent prohibitions, release them from the most stringent prohibitions. The people are righteous. They tend toward righteousness. So both in a place where the sages said to kindle and in a place where they said not to kindle, they intended only to achieve the same objective, fulfilling a mitzvah, refraining from marital relations. Even though different places have different customs, the Jewish people all aspire to sanctity. This is a very beautiful view of the Jewish people. Of course, we all make mistakes. Some of us make terrible mistakes. But generally speaking, the Jewish heart wants to do good in the world and wants to connect with the divine in the world. On the topic of kindling a lamp for Yom Kippur, the Gemara discusses a related point. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, one should recite the blessing over fire. Right? What is the blessing? We say over fire. If we're kindling a candle, we're not saying a blessing over the fire. We're saying it's over the light that we're lighting for Shabbos. That's not the blessing. The blessing over fire itself is the one that we say at havdala after Shabbos ends, right? So one should recite the blessing over fire, who creates the lights of fire. We would say, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the lights of the fire. That's part of the havdala blessing. So one should recite the blessing over fire only at the conclusion of Shabbos, right? That's when we do it, when we say havdala, when we separate the holiness of Shabbos from the mundane days of the week that begins Saturday night. Since the conclusion of Shabbos is the time of its original creation, that the light of a flame, that flames of fire were actually only created at the end of the first Shabbos. The sages are going to take issue with that teaching, so that they do not all agree on that. We're going to get to that quite soon. But the teaching right here is that we should say that blessing, Borei Me'orei Ha'esh, God who creates the lights of fire, who creates the lights of fire, it should only be said when Shabbos ends, as opposed to when Yom Kippur ends. That's what they're arguing about. For sure we say it when Shabbos ends. Do we say that blessing when Yom Kippur ends? That's the question that they're going to be arguing about. So we pick up, there's going to be a story where they argue about what is the source for this law and what did Rabbi Yochanan say. We're going to skip that story and we're going to move forward. So the Gemara raises an objection from that which was previously taught, that one recites a blessing over fire only at the conclusion of Shabbos and not at the conclusion of festivals or Yom Kippur, since the conclusion of Shabbos is the time of its fire, its original creation. And once he sees it, he recites the blessing immediately. Rabbi Yehuda says one does not recite the blessing immediately. Rather, he waits and arranges and recites the blessings over fire and spices over the cup of wine that accompanies the recitation of havdala. Right? So if you ever do the havdala ceremony, we're holding a cup of wine. Somebody is standing nearby with some spice that we're going to smell, to enjoy the fragrance. And there's going to be the havdala candle. And we say that blessing last, even though we light the havdala candle first, right? We open the havdala ceremony by lighting the havdala candle, but we don't say that blessing right away. Why? Because we have a kind of like a choreography of the havdala ceremony, and we say that blessing later, and that is per this teaching of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yochanan says the halacha, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara asks, since the blessing over fire commemorates the creation of fire, why is this blessing recited after Yom Kippur? Because some say that we do recite it after Yom Kippur. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here, where Rabbi Yochanan said that one recites the blessing at the conclusion of Yom Kippur, it is referring to a fire that rested on Yom Kippur. In other words, fire for which no prohibition was involved in its kindling, either because it was kindled before Shabbos or because it was kindled in a permitted manner. If there was a dangerously ill person who needed the light, we would kindle a fire, even on Yom Kippur, even on Shabbos. There, where Rabbi Yochanan said that the blessing is recited only at the conclusion of Shabbos, it is referring to fire generated from wood and from stones after Shabbos, similar to the primordial fire, the first fire, which was created at the conclusion of Shabbos. It was taught in one baraisa, with regard to fire generated from wood and stones, one recites a blessing over it. And it was taught in another baraisa, one does not recite a blessing over it. This apparent contradiction is not difficult. Here, where the baraisa states that one recites a blessing, it is referring to the conclusion of Shabbos. And there, where the baraisa states that one does not recite a blessing, it is referring to the conclusion of Yom Kippur. Now, I've definitely been in synagogue, right, on Yom Kippur, and at the end, I saw that havdala, that big havdala candle come out. What was it lit with? Let's just pause now and read what is the actual halacha on these questions. So this is where the law eventually was settled after all the dispute. When does one recite a blessing over fire? The blessing over fire is recited both at the conclusion of Shabbos and the conclusion of Yom Kippur in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan said that. The sages actually argued about what did Rabbi Yochanan actually say. But here we have it definitive. Rabbi Yochanan said, and this is the way we do it, we light a candle and say a blessing over fire after Shabbat ends and after Yom Kippur ends. Fire at the conclusion of Shabbos, or we say a blessing over that flame after Yom Kippur ends. Hold on. Fire at the conclusion of Shabbos. The blessing over fire recited at the conclusion of Shabbos may be recited over any fire, provided it was not used for prohibited activities. If you lit that fire while it was still Shabbos, that was prohibited. So you can't say Borei Merei Ha'esh, the blessing over the God who creates fire, when we separate between Shabbos and the week. over a prohibited flame if it was used for a prohibited purpose. But if you lit it not for any prohibited purpose, then any fire will do. It could be a match, it could be a candle, it could be a beautiful havdala candle. It doesn't have to be. When people don't have a nice havdala candle, they'll put two candles together. It should be a multi-wick candle. Sometimes you don't even have that. You put two matches together and say the blessing. But fire at the conclusion of Yom Kippur. After Yom Kippur, one may recite the blessing only over fire that was burning throughout Yom Kippur. Right? You need it to have like a yard-side candle, the kind of candle that will keep burning for 24 hours or more. You need to have that kind of candle, and then you can light from that after Yom Kippur. One may not recite the blessing over fire kindled after Yom Kippur. You can't just light a new fire after Yom Kippur and make this blessing, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who creates the lights of fire. We say that blessing over fire after Yom Kippur, but we can't do it over a new flame. Why? The Rashba, citing the Ravad, and the Maggid Mishna state that one should make a concerted effort to find after Yom Kippur, to find fire after Yom Kippur on which to recite the blessing, and to underscore the fact that Yom Kippur has greater sanctity than the three pilgrimage festivals, rather than Passover or Shavuos or Sukkot. As on Yom Kippur, kindling fire is prohibited, right? So Yom Kippur is different. Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, we can cook on those days, and therefore we can light a flame even during the Yom Tov, during the festival. Yom Kippur is like Shabbos, we cannot light, but Shabbos is when fire was originally created. So it's okay at the end of Shabbos to light this new flame and say a blessing over it. Since that condition does not exist for Yom Kippur, unless Yom Kippur coincides with Shabbos, then you could light a new flame after Yom Kippur. But if it's a regular day of the week that Yom Kippur falls on, you try to have a fire that was already lit all through Yom Kippur. Light your havdala candle with that, so it's an existing flame, and then say that blessing. We continue our discussion, and now we get into some very famous Talmudic teachings. The Gemara stated that fire was originally created at the conclusion of Shabbos. The Gemara asks, was fire created at the conclusion of Shabbos? Wasn't it taught in a baraisa? 10 miraculous phenomena were created in heaven on Erev Shabbos, on Friday, right before Shabbos began, during twilight. Late on Friday afternoon before Shabbos began Friday night. So there were 10 miraculous phenomena that were created at the very end of the 6 days of creation, just before Shabbos came in. And what were they? They were Miriam's well. So when the children of Israel were wandering in the desert, in the merit of Moses' sister, Miriam, and her tremendous righteousness, they had water everywhere where they went, and it was considered to be that, and it was like a rock that they carried with them. And once that God said, "This is the place where you're going to camp," they put that rock down, and then water would spring forth from it, enough to provide the needs of 2 million people in the desert. Quite a powerful well. That was Miriam's well, and the manna that fell in the desert. And the rainbow, right? That would eventually be the sign between God and humanity, that God would never again bring a flood to destroy the earth. Writing. Where would we be if we didn't have writing? And the writing instrument, right? We wouldn't be. It's good to have the concept of writing, but if you didn't have what to write with, how much good is it going to do you? The tablets of the 10 Commandments. The grave of Moses. Why is the grave of Moses a miraculous phenomenon? Well, no one knows where it is to this day. The cave in which Moses and Elijah stood. The opening of the mouth of Bilam's donkey. Remember that when King Balak wanted to curse the children of Israel in the wilderness, and he brought the prophet, the non-Jewish prophet Bilam, to curse the people. And Bilam said, "I can only do what God instructs me to do." God instructed Balaam to bless the people rather than to curse them. And now we have some beautiful, beautiful blessings that we say to each other that we're quoting Balaam, right? How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. That came out of the mouth of the prophet Balaam when King Balak asked him to curse the Jewish people. But first, Balaam had an encounter with an angel, and he had a conversation with his own donkey who didn't want to go because the donkey could see the angel, even though the prophet Balaam couldn't. So, the extent of Balaam's prophecy is thrown a little bit into question when his donkey could see an angel and he himself couldn't. The opening of the earth's mouth to swallow the wicked in the rebellion of Korach in the wilderness. Those are the 10. Rabbi Nehemiah said in the name of his father, even the fire and the mule, which is a product of crossbreeding, were created at that time. So that's why this teaching is being brought, because Rabbi Nehemiah said, wait a minute, fire was not created after the first Shabbos. It was actually one of those things that was created right at the end of the creation in the twilight, just before Shabbos began, still on the 6th day. And then this other one is so odd, the mule, the idea that you could crossbreed a donkey and a horse and produce a mule. Like, why did that have to be, created in advance? Rabbi Yoshiah said in the name of his father, also the ram that was slaughtered by Abraham in place of Isaac, and the shamir, the worm that was used to shape the stones for the altar, were created at that time. Right? So God instructed when we make the original altar, where the sacrifices are brought, and then later when Solomon built the temple and the altar in the temple in Jerusalem, and the stones of the temple itself were never chiseled, right? They were never chiseled. How were those rocks split? With this miraculous worm that could actually burrow its way into rock and then crack it, and crack large blocks of rock. Where am I? And Rabbi Yehuda says, even the tongs were created at this time. Sal, did you just say tongs? What do you mean? Like the tongs that a blacksmith uses when he is blacksmithing, right? He's got that super hot fire. He's going to make something out of metal, whether it's iron or copper or bronze, and whatever metal he's going to be using, right? And he's going to hold that ingot of metal so that he can hammer it on his anvil. What's he holding it with? The tongs, right? Why were the first tongs, why are they included in this list? Because everything that a blacksmith makes has to be held so that he can hammer it on the anvil, including tongs. So to make tongs, you need tongs. Who made the first tongs? Hashem. God made the first tong. That's what the sages are saying here. And he would say, Rabbi Yehuda would say, tongs can be fashioned only with other tongs, but who fashioned the first tongs? Indeed, the first pair of tongs was fashioned at the hand of heaven. An anonymous questioner said to him, it is possible to fashion tongs with a mold and align it without the need of other tongs. Indeed, the first tongs were a creation of man. So this is a matter of dispute. In any event, fire was originally created before Shabbos, not at the conclusion of Shabbos, according to this teaching. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. This Baraisa is referring to our fire, and that Baraisa is referring to the fire of Gehenna. So we're talking about two different kinds of fire. One fire was created at the conclusion of the first Shabbos that Adam and Eve enjoyed. Unfortunately, they sinned in the Garden of Eden, and they would be thrown out of the Garden of Eden. But they sinned on Friday, late on Friday. God permitted them to enjoy one Shabbos in the Garden of Eden. And after the Shabbos ended, then they were sent out of the Garden of Eden, owing to their sin of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So which fire is it? So now they're arguing about that fire was created late on Friday, or is it Motzi Shabbos, Saturday night? Well, we're talking about two different kinds of fire. So the Gemara explains, our fire was created at the conclusion of Shabbos, but the fire of Gehenna was created on Shabbos Eve. And the Gemara proceeds to ask, was the fire of Gehenna created on Shabbos Eve? Wasn't it taught in another Baraisa? 7 phenomena were created before the world was created. Not on Friday before the end of the 6 days of creation and before the first Shabbos, but there are 7 things that were created even before God said, let there be light, and created our physical universe where we dwell and where God's presence is hidden. But there were 7 things that God created before he created the physical universe that would eventually lead to, conscious beings who can understand there's a God and be thankful to God. What were the 7 phenomena created even before this world was created? According to our sages, they are Torah, repentance, the Garden of Eden, Gehenna, the throne of glory, the temple, and the name of Mashiach, the name of the Messiah. Now, the Gemara will explain what each of these 7 are and why they had to be created before the world was created. Torah was created before the world was created. As it is written, the Lord made me as the beginning of his way, the first of his works of old. That's from Mishle 8:22, Proverbs 8:22, which, based on the subsequent verses, is referring to the Torah. Repentance, teshuvah, was created before the world was created, as it is written, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And it is written immediately afterward, you return man to contrition, and you say, repent, children of man. In other words, when God created the universe, God's purpose was that eventually in the universe there would be beings who are independent, who are not they don't grow up overwhelmed by the presence of God, so much so that they don't have free will. That is the condition of the angels. God had in mind to create a world where eventually beings would arise who are intelligent, who can ask questions about the world, who can make moral decisions, but can do so in a place where they're not overwhelmed by the presence of God. Now, are they just going to run rampant in that world and murder and kill each other and do all kinds of wicked, despicable things? We have that choice, but God certainly gave us a guide to live by and tools that would enable us to live righteously. And what are those tools? Torah, right? Summed up in the 10 Commandments, meaning that there is an eternal source of values, of right and wrong. Humans are not entrusted to decide, the very basics of good and evil. We look to the 10 Commandments to tell us, what are the basics that will always be right and wrong. We can always look to the 10 Commandments, and they will never change, and that is Torah. And teshuvah, atonement, means even though, God gave us a source, an eternal source of right and wrong, given the nature of humans, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to do all kinds of mistakes, some terrible mistakes. But there will always be the opportunity for teshuvah. No matter how far astray we go, we can always find our way back to God. We'll still be held accountable for our sins, but we can still come back to the bosom of the Lord, as it were. The Garden of Eden. Why was the Garden of Eden created before the physical universe? As it is written, and God planted the Garden of Eden in the east. This term, in the east, mikedem, is interpreted in the sense of before, because the sun rises in the east and comes toward the west. What's in the east is considered before what's in the west. So the Garden of Eden is totally in the east. It means it was the first thing that was created, meaning before the universe, before the world was created. What about Gehenna? Gehenna was created before the world was created, as it is written, for its hearth is ordained of old. That's Isaiah 30:33. The hearth, i.e. Gehenna, hearth, like a fireplace, Gehenna was created before the world was created. Why are the Garden of Eden and Gehenna necessarily created before the physical universe is created? Because what they represent is that good will be rewarded. Gan Eden represents paradise, heaven, a reward for doing our best to live righteously in this world. And Gehenna is a place of punishment, right? So we've talked many times before. I'm not going to do a big discussion tonight, but the sage's understanding of the afterlife is much more nuanced and has many more sort of possibilities where you're going to end up than just the binary heaven or hell, right? It's really not like that. I mean, there's the world to come. So there's a place that we go to, the world of souls. There's also going to be a return to this world when there's resurrection of the dead after the Messiah comes. While we're in the world of souls, there's an infinite number of levels where you can end up. And that's why we always wish for somebody when they lose a loved one who goes to the next world, that the loved one's neshama, his soul, should have a great aliyah, a great elevation. They should end up very high up in the world of souls. It's obvious that they're in the world of souls. They're, of course, in heaven, but that they should have a very high up and beautiful position in heaven. Hell, generally speaking, is a temporary place where a soul that has not been able to atone for its sins in this world has to pay a price in the next world. It is not, for the most part, any kind of an eternal damnation. Some, yes, some very, very wicked people we'll talk about again, who do tremendous, tremendous evil, can lose their place in the world to come forever. Even then, it's possible that somehow, other meritorious people will somehow try to lift that person out of Gehenna if they have a decree of an eternal damnation, as it were. But this is not, it's like very rare, right? Super rare. Like you have to be so evil, not just a standard person who didn't do enough goodness. However, you don't want to get that temporary hell either. The fires of Gehenna are terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. And, some things that if you're a Jew, you gotta make sure you do your best to keep Shabbos. If you're a woman, to light candles. If you're a man, to wrap tefillin, keep Shabbos, wrap tefillin, learn Torah. And the more mitzvahs, the more commandments you fulfill, the better. The better for you, the better for the Jewish people, the better for the whole world. If you're not a Jew, you're bound by the Noahide commandments, the 7 commandments that oblige all people. And the first one of those is to know God, to learn about God, to study Torah, to do what you're doing right now. You're fulfilling the first commandment that is on all humanity whenever you're learning Torah. In addition, of course, don't kill, don't steal, don't eat a limb torn from a living animal, establish courts of law, don't engage in prohibited sexual behavior, etc. All right. What else was created before the universe was created, and it was a necessary precondition to the universe being created? Of those 7, so the next one is the throne of glory and the temple. The throne of glory and the temple were created before the world was created. As it is written, your throne of glory on high from the beginning in the place of your sanctuary. That's Jeremiah 17:12. And the name of Mashiach, the name of the Messiah, was created before the world was created. As it is written in the chapter discussing the Messiah, may his name endure forever. His name existed before the sun. That's Psalm 72:17. The name of the Messiah already existed before the creation of the sun and the rest of the world. So the throne of glory and the temple, what are they? That's God's dwelling place. The throne of glory, God's dwelling place in the upper world. The temple, God's dwelling place in our world, right? And because they're mentioned together, meaning that God is involved in the affairs of this world, God maintains a weekend home, as it were. Not a weekend home, a constant presence, right? God can, unlike us, who can only be here or there, not in both places, God can be everywhere at once. and God is always among us, right? And so but there are certain places where God chooses to make his presence more revealed. The temple was one such place when it stood in Jerusalem, and we pray that the third temple will come soon. And when will it come? When Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes. And what does it mean that there will be a Messiah, and that we long for the Messiah every day, and that we have complete emunah, a complete faith that the Messiah will come one day, and even though he may take a long time and we don't understand why, one day he will come. And why does that matter? Because it gives direction and purpose to all of human history. It's not random. Terrible things happen in this world. It's not given to us to understand why terrible things happen in this world, but it is given to us to know that it is all headed somewhere. God has a plan. Trust God. He has a plan. And that is all represented. The fact that God has a plan and this is all going somewhere is represented by the idea that from the beginning, God had a plan, and that eventually he would send a Messiah so that the plan would be revealed. That's what the Messiah coming means. It means that God's plan will be revealed. When the Messiah comes, we'll understand what all those terrible hardships were all about. Now we just trust God. But when the Messiah comes and the Messianic age begins, we'll actually be able to understand and even see with our own eyes what that purpose was. The Baraisa states that Gehenna was created before the world was created, and not during twilight before the first Shabbos. So now we've had three possibilities of when fire was created. At the conclusion of the first Shabbos, just before the first Shabbos, and before the world was created at all. So which is it? So it seems like, well, maybe the fire of Gehenna was created before the first Shabbos. But now we have a teaching, no, the fire of Gehenna, the fires of the punishing place, were created even before the world was created. So we have a contradiction. Excuse me. So they say in answer, the void of Gehenna was created before the world, but its fire was created on the eve of Shabbos, on Friday, the sixth day of creation. So the idea of Gehenna was created. A place for Gehenna was created. There were no souls to populate it yet. So it was just the idea of Gehenna existed, meaning that evil will be punished. But the fires didn't need to be lit until the first sin occurred. When Adam and Eve committed the first sin in this world, God lit the fires of Gehenna, sort of getting it ready for eventually they would have to spend some time there. Maybe. That's what it seems to be indicated. The Gemara asks, was the fire of Gehenna created just before Shabbos, the first Shabbos? Wasn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says, the fire that the Holy One, blessed be He, created on the second day of the week will never be extinguished, as it is stated. This is from Isaiah 66:24. Quote, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men who have rebelled against me, for their worm shall not die, nor will their fire be extinguished, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. And Rabbi Benaiah, son of Rabbi Ula, said, why doesn't the verse state that it was good at the end of the second day of the week of creation? Right? At the end of all the other days, God says, and God saw that what is created, and God said that it was good, and then it was the first day, or the third day, or the fourth day. But at the end of the second day, he doesn't say that it was good. What happened on the second day? There was a division in the world. It was the beginning, the first time that the unity of God was broken. There was division, right? And so God did not say it was good at the end of the second day. Where am I? Yeah. And why doesn't the verse state that it was good at the end of the second day of the week of creation, as it does on the other days? It is because on that day, the fire of Gehenna was created. So now we have yet another answer of when was the fire of Gehenna, when was the fire lit in Gehenna? On the second day of creation. So far we've heard Maybe it was after Shabbos. No, they agree it must have been before Shabbos. Maybe it was just before Shabbos. Maybe it was before the world was created. Now we're hearing second day of creation. And God later included it on the sixth day, as it is stated, and God saw all that he had done, and behold, it was very good. Tov me'od, it was very good. Rather, the void of Gehenna was created before the world was created, and its fire was created on the second day of the week. And the thought arose in God's mind to create our fire on the eve of Shabbos, before the first Shabbos. However, it was not actually created until the conclusion of Shabbos, as it was taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yosef says, the thoughts of two phenomena arose in God's mind on the eve of Shabbos, right, on Friday afternoon, but were not actually created until after the first Shabbos, Saturday night, until the conclusion of Shabbos. And at the conclusion of Shabbos, the Holy One, blessed be He, granted Adam, the first man, creative knowledge, similar to divine knowledge, and he brought two rocks and rubbed them against each other, and the first fire emerged from them. Right, so in terms of the fire that we recognize, the flame, not the fires of Gehenna, that's a spiritual fire we can't even understand when we're still alive in this world. But in terms of the fire that we understand in this world, that was created after the conclusion of the first Shabbos. And how was it created? God gave Adam and Eve the understanding, the sechel, the intelligence to figure out, hit those two stones together, make sparks on some kindling, and have fire. Why did they need it? It was a comfort to them as they were leaving the beauty and paradise of the Garden of Eden, and they would have to go out into the world and by the sweat of their brow earn their bread, but at least they wouldn't be in darkness and in cold. They had fire to accompany them in that wilderness. Okay, I just have a few quick teachings, so if you have questions and comments, put them in there now, and then I'm just going to read 3 little paragraphs before I go to your questions. The sages taught, well, we said this already. The sages taught 10 phenomena were created at late Friday afternoon, right? We said Miriam's well, it's repeated now, the manna, the rainbow, writing and the writing instrument, the tablets of the 10 Commandments, the grave of Moses, the cave in which Moses and Elijah stood, the opening of the mouth of Bilam's donkey, and the opening of the mouth of the earth to swallow the wicked in the time of Korach, the rebellion of Korach in the wilderness against Moses. And some say that even Aaron's staff, right? So at a certain point, the other tribes challenged Aaron, right? Korach said it too. Like, why are you elevated, above us? Aren't we a nation of priests? Why are you going to be the high priest? Why should you be elevated among us? And of course, Moses and Aaron answered, we didn't make these rules, God did. And to show you that it's God who's making the rules, everybody put your staff in the ground, the leaders of the other tribes. Moses put his staff down in the ground. Which of his staffs blossomed like almond flowers, miraculously grew out of a wooden staff that was, it was a staff. It was a stick, like a walking stick. Long separated from the tree on which it grew. But of course, God performed a miracle, and the staff of Aaron produced those almond blossoms, to demonstrate that he had been picked by God. It wasn't Moses and Aaron who decided that Aaron would be the high priest. It was God. Why would God need to create that so early, thousands of years before it actually happened, before that miracle happened? Why was it, foreordained in that way, planned from the very beginning of creation? Because what was the destiny of the Jewish people? To bring Torah, to bring the 10 Commandments into the world. And these were all events surrounding the revelation at Mount Sinai, and the complex relationship that the Jews would enter into with it right from the beginning. Tragically, we committed the sin of the golden calf. almost as soon as we received. We would just, we showed our unworthiness, but thank God, God also granted us teshuvah, atonement. And some say that even the demons were created at this time. And some say that even the garment of Adam, the first man, was created at this time, as it is stated, and God made for Adam and his wife garments of skins and clothed them. Apropos the list of items created during the twilight, the Gemara cites that the sages taught 7 matters, right? Now we've seen 7 matters that were created before even the universe was created. Now they teach 7 matters are concealed from people, and they are. So this is the nature of the world that we live in. 7 things are concealed from us. The day of our death. No one knows what day they will die. The day of consolation from one's concerns. Things are tough. We're worried. It's not given to us to know when our problems will be solved. The profundity of justice, ascertaining the truth in certain disputes, or perhaps say, why do the wicked often suffer why do the wicked prosper while the righteous suffer? It's not given to us to know, and it's not given to us to really ever have perfect justice. We do the best we can. We establish courts of law, we train our judges, we hold them to high standards, we try to have as just a system as we possibly can, but it is not given to humans to know exactly what is the right answer every time. We can only do our best. It's not given to us to see everything that the murderer saw and did before he killed. It's not given to us to see everything that happened when there was a crime. All we can do is ask witnesses to come in and testify what they saw and what they remember. And that's not going to be as perfect as God, who can look into the minds of the perpetrator and of the victim and of the witnesses and understand exactly what happened. We can't. We just do our best. It is also concealed from people. A person also does not know what is in the heart of another person. And a person does not know in what way he will earn a profit, right? Ask the people on Wall Street. No one knows for sure what that market is going to do. And one does not know when the monarchy of the house of David will be restored to Israel, and when the wicked Roman monarchy will cease to exist. Meaning, symbolically, when will the reign of injustice in this world end and a world of real justice be restored? That will be when the Messiah comes. The sages taught on a similar note, the thoughts of 3 matters arose in God's mind to be created, and if they did not arise in his thoughts, well, by right they should have arisen in his thoughts, as they are fundamental to the existence of the world. This is the sages being chutzpahdik, right? They're saying this must have been on God's mind, because if God didn't think about these things, it would be impossible for God to create a world. So clearly God thought of this. We don't have proof, but logically we can derive that God must have thought of these things. And what are they? God created a world in which a corpse rots. Didn't have to be. Could be that people die and then their body just, sits there and doesn't decompose. Why is it good that human bodies decompose after they die? So that it requires burial, and the family does not continually suffer by seeing the corpse of their loved one. Second, that the deceased are forgotten from the heart. Obviously, we don't forget the people that we love and who leave this world. Of course, we remember them. We hold them in our hearts. But that horrible pain when someone dies, when we lose someone and we're just so bereft, with time it gets better, right? With time it gets better, and we thank God that the world was created in that way. And finally, that grain will rot. God must have done that on purpose. Why? Why is it a good thing that grain will rot? So that it cannot be hoarded forever, and therefore one must sell his produce. And some say God instituted that currency will circulate so that people will accept money as a method of payment. God must have had in mind that the world would require money rather than people carrying around sacks of grain every time they want to trade for the things that they need. Money's a very useful invention, quite practical. Credit cards, all the more so, right? a tool, neither good nor bad, but it's something that makes life easier than carrying sacks of grain on our shoulders every time we want to go barter. All right, let us check comments and questions. I got to imagine there's going to be a few. Okay, Sharon Frant Brooks. The latter list is more of a spiritual listing, it seems, but the former seem more to be physically symbolic. So these teachings may not be in conflict with one another, or so it seems to me. At this point, we've read a lot of lists. I'm not sure when you asked the question. But for example, when we're talking about, was fire created after Shabbos or before Shabbos? Obviously, this is the kind of stuff that even the sages knew very well. There's no proof, there's no way to be certain on any of these teachings. But what they really are is a starting point for understanding the human condition, right? And for us to be able to hold our heads high and be cheerful walking around in this world, we really have to have a sense that there is right and wrong. And that ultimately, maybe we won't see it in this world, but that ultimately good is rewarded and evil is punished. We need to know those things, right? And these lists are really all about that. They're sort of basic, fundamental questions of how God ordained that the world should be. And they really show a trust in God's benevolence. Sharon says, I don't understand the teaching that says we can kindle a flame on the Chagim. We can cook, but it must be from a pre-existing flame. Very good. So that's absolutely true. We cook and we want to do it from a pre-existing flame rather than to kindle one from scratch. So I guess that's just one of the nuances that they were talking about. But even that, right, kindling a new flame from an existing flame, we don't do on Yom Kippur. Right, so we saw that where we started with this Mishnah is that some communities will light a candle to have the house lit during Yom Kippur, and some wouldn't. I mean, these days, okay, things are a little bit different. Nobody's really sitting in the dark all through Yom Kippur. As far as I know, I don't think anyone has that practice. But certainly the stringencies of Yom Kippur exceed those of by a lot of other festivals, and I think that was the point they were trying to make there. Good point, though. Aham Svarupa, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but Aham Svarupa is the fire of Gehenna pedagogical, purgative, punitive, or some combination of the three? Those are some big words. I think that for sure they're purgative and punitive, right? There's a price to be paid for sins in this world. Now, sometimes we can kind of wipe the slate clean while we're still here if we do a really good job of atoning for our sins. Sometimes we commit sins that are too grave, and we're going to have a price to pay when we leave this world. So in that sense, they're both punitive and purgative. I mean, I assume by purgative, or I think that's how you pronounce it, you're saying, is it a place where we get refined, right? Where we sort of, wash that sin right out of our soul so that we can then continue our journey up into the upper world. And that's definitely a sense that the sages have. When you say pedagogical, are you saying, so it's a teaching tool to tell us why, right, we have to conduct ourselves properly while we're here? Yes, that's true too. And it's very important to understand that, as we see all the time in the Talmud, the sages argue with each other. When they come to a final conclusion, and they usually do in matters of halacha, meaning what is the law, how are we going to conduct ourselves, we still see variety between communities. But on the big things, the law is the law, and that's what a Jew is obligated to do. On these kinds of questions, that are sort of bigger questions, how we conduct ourselves, very often there's not a final answer, right? So the nature of the world to come, the nature of punishment, the sages say a lot on it. They don't come to final answers and total agreement. And really what we want to do is learn from each of the teachings. But all of these teachings, right? All of these teachings, I think this is what you mean by pedagogical. Does it lead us to examine our deeds? That's the key. Does it lead us to examine our deeds? A lot of people will say, look, there's so many Jews in the world now that are completely alienated from Judaism. So there's all these Jews in the world who are obligated. Like, it doesn't matter that we didn't sign on the dotted line. If you're born a Jew, you're obligated. You're obligated in Shabbos. You're obligated in kashrus, in the eating law, the dietary laws, the marital laws, all kinds of laws. And so many Jews are wandering around the world, they don't even know what the laws are. How could they possibly fulfill their obligations if they don't even know what their obligations are? And so then the question would be, could they possibly be punished for not following laws that they don't even know exist? Would God be a vindictive being like that? We believe God is kind, God is good, and so how could God do that? There's a lot of different answers to these questions. But the fact is, if you know you're a Jew, then you do know that there's things you should know about how to conduct yourselves. Doesn't mean that you have to now run out and become, the most Hasidic Orthodox Jew. You don't need to instantly do everything, but you really want to be moving up that ladder. You want to be growing in observance. You want to be growing in kindness. You want to be growing closer to God. You want to be growing in your destiny as a Jew. So it starts by learning. It starts by maybe having a moment every day of saying thank you to God. There's a story told, a Hasidic story about a guy who was a totally secular Jew, turned his back on all Judaism, went out into the world, was a very successful businessman, eating swine, eating lobster, totally forgetting about Shabbos, etc. And then he heard a story that a body was found, and no one knew who it was, right? It was a victim of a crime. It was killed in another town. No one knew who it was. But when they examined the body, he was wearing tzitzis, right? So like the garment that I wear under my shirt that has the fringes, that's a commandment. That's a Torah commandment that we wear fringes on our garments. That's for Jewish men. And because this man had tzitzis on, so they knew he was a Jew. And the local Jewish community gave him a proper burial. And this rich guy thought to himself, I'm wealthy now. Who knows what could happen? Maybe I could end up a pauper. And maybe I could be the victim of a crime. And then if I was just anybody and I wasn't a member of the Jewish community, I wasn't identified as a Jew, then they would just send me to, Potter's Field, the pauper's grave, just like some kind of a mass grave. But if they knew I was a Jew, so then they would give me a proper burial with my own grave. That's a good reason to wear tzitzis, just like that body that was found. So the guy started wearing tzitzis. It was easy to do. He was wearing it under his clothes. Nobody even knew he was doing it. Only he knew. And it was just for that purpose that, God forbid, one day he dies a penniless pauper. He should get that proper burial. But once he starts fulfilling this one mitzvah of wearing tzitzis under his clothes, he becomes curious about other mitzvahs. He becomes curious about Torah. He starts learning. And in the long run, becomes a Shabbos observant Jew. And more important, that's very important, but also, he just grew in wisdom and kindness and became such a bigger mensch in the community. Living by these laws, if they don't make you a better person, then something's missing from your observance. Okay, some more comments. Yosef Shum asks, what does it mean that the name of the Messiah was known? The meaning of the name he is called, like we saw in earlier tractates, or who the Messiah would be in which generation. What it means that the name of the Messiah was determined before even the world was created is that God knew, right, who the Messiah would be. If he knows who the Messiah will be, he knows when the Messiah is going to come. In other words, God has a plan. What it means that the name of the Messiah is known to God from the very beginning is that the world has an arc. Right? Our universe has an arc, has a beginning, a middle, some kind of an end. When the Messiah will come and the knowledge of God will fill the world as water fills the sea. So that God has a plan. That's what it means. And finally, Bill Eldridge. It's always great to see you, Bill, and your comments are so welcome. Bill, I know, comes from another tradition. You're some kind of Christian, but I don't know which kind you are. But I know you're at the theology school at Berkeley. And is a very thoughtful guy. So Bill says, so I notice that all these things that were created miraculously in the twilight of the first Erev Shabbos, late Friday afternoon before the first Shabbos, are either about God providing or communicating. About the only one that I don't think quite fits in those two is the pit for the rebellion of Korach and his followers, which feels more like God's justice. You could also argue Moses' grave, but that feels like it's linked to Moses being the greatest of prophets and God's chief communicator. Now, mind you, I haven't the faintest idea what that means. It's just striking to me. It's a good observation. It is interesting. There were other rebellions, right? There were all kinds of Jews who behaved very badly. But perhaps the idea that the pit would open up and swallow Korach and his followers, right? Why then? Why that particular rebellion among the Jewish people to be singled out and said that that's something that was created at the very beginning of creation? I'm just guessing, right? But it seems to me that what God was saying was that was like a fork in the road, right? And it could have gone very badly, and the whole project could have been decimated, and God wasn't going to let that happen. And what I learned from that is whenever people are hatching ideas, right? Maybe you're writing a book, with a partner. Maybe you have a business project that two of you are going to put together. You're forming a company. You're going to do a proposal. You're forming a new sports team. Whatever the new project is, right? Why are you going to do anything at all? Because it was an initial idea that seemed attractive and said, you know what, let's work on this. Let's make this happen. And you gather, people together to get on it. Until that thing really gets up and running, it's fragile. It's so fragile, right? New ideas, new projects, new construction, new companies, new institutions, they're so fragile. And it really takes, it's really worth it being supportive when you're there at the birth of something new, And when people are brainstorming and spitballing ideas, don't just say, that doesn't sound right, Run, there's that acting principle in actors' classes, yes and, right? So you see that something's wrong with the idea, instead of saying no but, instead of saying no, go with yes and. Yes, and then add your nuance or your wrinkle. Because when those ideas are so fragile, they can die so easily, and so many opportunities can be lost because we weren't supportive at the outset of something. That's what I've got for us today. These are some very famous Talmudic teachings about these phenomena that were created right at the beginning of the world. And when we understand why the sages felt that they had to be created at the beginning of the world, we understand a little bit more about this world, the nature of this world, the nature of God, what can be understood by us, and the relationship between us and God, between God and the world, between us and the world. And may we grow in wisdom. All the best.